Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are peering beneath the surface of something so fundamental to our existence that, well, we rarely even realize it's there. Habits. We are talking about the invisible structure that dictates nearly every outcome in your life.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, if you want to know what truly controls your days, it is not the conscious decisions you labor over. Not at all.
Right. It's the small stuff.
It is. It's the vast, invisible scaffolding of routine. Decades of research, and Charles Duhigg synthesizes this so powerfully, suggests that more than 40% of the actions people perform each day.
Every single day.
Every day. From the moment they wake up to the moment they fall asleep. These aren't actual decisions. They are simply habits.
40%.
Yeah.
When you absorb that statistic, I mean, it means nearly half of your waking hours are spent operating on autopilot. You're driven by triggers and routines you barely even notice.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to move far beyond that simple concept of, set a goal and try harder. We need to understand the deep, ancient neurology, the mechanical steps, and even the cascading societal impact of these loops.
Right.
We are going to unpack the comprehensive analysis from the source material and really uncover why we do what we do.
And by the end of this deep dive, you will have the complete playbook. We'll reveal the specific ancient part of your brain where these habits actually live.
Yep.
You will understand the three-step loop that dictates all behavior.
Okay.
And crucially, we will reveal the one secret ingredient, this powerful neurological mechanism that transforms a temporary action into a permanent, almost irresistible craving.
And then the big one.
The big one. We'll discuss the one type of habit, the keystone habit, that triggers positive, wholesale change across completely unrelated areas of your life.
I think the best way to start this journey is with a real life, just a stunning human transformation. It's one that initially baffled the scientists who were studying habit change.
Oh, yes.
Let's look at Lisa Allen. She was a favorite participant in these early studies, mostly because of how dramatic her life shift was. When researchers first accessed her files, her life was just a series of compounding failures.
That file was sobering. Really sobering. She was 34, started smoking and drinking at 16, struggled severely with obesity, and at one point, collection agencies were hounding her for over $10,000 in debt.
Wow.
Her longest job lasted less than a year. She was essentially a textbook case of self-sabotage, just characterized by dozens of destructive, deeply ingrained routines.
Yet the woman who arrived at the lab was completely unrecognizable. I mean, she was lean, physically vibrant, clearly fit.
Until 180.
In a relatively short span of time, we're talking about 4 years, she had lost 60 pounds, completed a marathon, quit smoking, started a master's degree, and bought her first home. Everything had fundamentally changed.
So the central question for the researchers was, what was the catalyst? What kicked all this off? Because this wasn't, incremental improvement across all areas.
No, it was a tidal wave.
It was a massive cascading overhaul that started in one place. And the trigger was profoundly anticlimactic on the surface. It began during a trip to Cairo.
Okay.
She was jet-lagged. She was depressed. She reached for a cigarette in the dark hotel room, missed, and tried to light a pen instead.
And she describes this as a moment of absolute despair, where she was just overwhelmed by sadness and the feeling that her life had simply crumbled around her. But in that moment, she had a single clarifying thought.
Just one.
She had to find one thing she could control.
And the resulting goal she set for herself was, frankly, absurd given her current physical condition and her smoking habit. She decided she would come back to Egypt and trek through the desert.
Which is a monumental undertaking.
Monumental. But that single desperate conviction, the necessity of giving up smoking to achieve that large, crazy goal, that was a small, singular shift. That was the first domino.
And what the brain scans showed later was so compelling. That one change created a neurological map that radiated out to nearly every other part of her life.
She wasn't consciously addressing her diet or her finances at first.
No.
But the change in the smoking habit seemed to create a chain reaction that automatically reshaped her entire life trajectory. It demonstrated that habits are not just isolated actions, but interconnected systems rooted in the fundamental mechanisms of the mind.
Which leads us directly to our first big question. Where exactly do these powerful, life-shaping patterns reside in the brain? Okay, let's unpack this. We need to go from a desperate moment in a Cairo hotel room to the microscopic activity in the brain. So where is that neurological map Lisa Allen provided? Where do habits live?
Habits reside in a deep, ancient, and a very primitive part of the brain known as the basal ganglia.
The basal ganglia.
Yes. And if we use that classic analogy of the human brain as an onion, the outer layers, the cerebral cortex, they're the most recent evolutionary additions. They handle complex thought, abstract reasoning, and conscious decision-making.
All the heavy lifting.
All the heavy lifting, exactly. But the basal ganglia, however, is a central nub of tissue situated deep in the center, much older than the cortex. It is the command center, specifically responsible for controlling automatic, routine behaviors.
So if the cortex is the conscious CEO poring over spreadsheets, the basal ganglia is the highly efficient chief operating officer just running things in the background.
That's a perfect analogy. And the basal ganglia's main job, which is central to all habit formation, is something scientists call chunking.
Explain chunking in detail. Why does the brain take a complex sequence of actions and convert it into a single automatic routine? What's the point?
The reason is pure efficiency, which has a massive evolutionary benefit. Think about the first time you learned to drive a car.
Oh, it's terrifying.
Terrifying. Or tying your shoes, or even just backing out of your driveway for the first time. It required total, focused, conscious attention from your cerebral cortex. You had to actively process every single step. Check the mirror, release the brake, apply slight gas, turn the wheel exactly so. The whole process was mentally exhausting.
It required maximum cognitive load. You're completely drained afterwards.
Precisely. Chunking is the brain's solution to this inefficiency. It converts that sequence of actions, check, release, apply, turn into one compressed habit chunk.
Got it.
Once that chunk is established in the basal ganglia, the entire sequence executes on minimal power. And the enormous benefit is that the rest of the brain, the cortex, can go into a near sleep-like state while the habit executes, freeing up all those cognitive resources for abstract tasks, problem solving, or, planning your day.
The sources cite the U.S. military as a massive real-world laboratory for habit formation, demonstrating the power of chunking under extreme pressure.
Yes, basic training is essentially applied habit psychology at scale. It's designed to instill engineered habits for things like loading a weapon or communicating under fire or reacting to a threat.
Things you can't be thinking about in the moment.
You can't. These vital behaviors are rehearsed to the point of automation so that in a chaotic, life-threatening situation, the ultimate high-stress inflection point, the soldier doesn't have to pause and think about what to do. The basal ganglia just takes over.
And the example of the Army major in Kufa, Iraq, provides a perfect, almost humorous application of this habit manipulation on a community level.
It's a compelling story of understanding community habits, not just individual ones. The major noticed that riots followed an almost perfectly predictable pattern. A crowd would gather in the plaza.
Okay.
The crowd would grow in size and density, food vendors and spectators would show up, and then inevitably violence would erupt as people got restless and agitated.
So the routine was get hungry or restless, and then violent.
That was the loop. So he didn't attack the political trigger or the underlying resentment. He attacked a subtle, unrelated routine within that loop.
He removed the vendors.
He removed the vendors. The community was accustomed to that sequence. When the local mayor agreed to keep food sellers out of the plaza entirely, subsequent crowds would gather and chant, fulfilling the initial cue. But as dusk hit, they would get hungry, restless, find no kebab sellers, and the spectators, lacking the reward of entertainment and food, would simply leave. By 8 p.m., the crowd dissolved. He used the knowledge of the three-step loop to create a durable peace.
That is incredible.
It is. It shows that even something as complex as a riot is itself a collection of social habits.
And that brings us to the core structure of how these chunks, like the riot routine or driving a car, are actually built. This structure was first mapped by MIT researchers using laboratory rats in T-shaped mazes.
This is the essential framework for everything we're going to discuss. The three-step loop cue, routine, and reward. CRR.
The setup was simple. The rats were positioned behind a partition that opened when a loud click or buzz sounded. That was the cue.
Initially, the rat would wander randomly, sniffing, scratching, using its cortex to process the new environment, until eventually, just by accident, it found the chocolate at the end, the reward.
And as they repeated this hundreds of times, the routine became automatic. The wandering stopped.
Yes. The routine, the actual behavior of finding the chocolate, became a single, effortless chunk. And this is where the neurological scans were so revealing. When the rats first started, their brains were frantic during the entire routine as they processed every turn.
Right, maximum effort.
But once the pattern was established, their mental activity decreased dramatically. The brain only spiked with attention at the beginning, the click cue, and at the very end, when he got the chocolate reward.
The middle part, the running, became just automatic.
It became an automatic, unthinking action executed by the basal ganglia.
So the CRR structure tells the brain. The cue is the trigger to start the autopilot. The routine is the behavior itself, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. And the reward is the payoff that helps the brain decide if this entire loop is worth remembering for the future.
That's the mechanism in a nutshell. And to fully appreciate how detached the routine can become from conscious thought, from memory, we have to talk about the incredible case of Eugene Pauly.
The case of Eugene Pauly is, I think, perhaps the most compelling evidence that habits and memory are housed in entirely different systems in the brain.
It's astounding. Eugene was an elderly man whose medical history was tragic. Viral encephalitis destroyed his medial temporal lobe. That's the brain's central memory center.
So he had amnesia.
Profound amnesia. He couldn't remember which day it was, the names of his doctors, or anything new for more than about 20 seconds. He literally couldn't draw a map of his own home because he couldn't retain the spatial layout.
Yet, critically, his basal ganglia, the habit center, was left completely intact.
And this created a profound, fascinating contradiction. He could not, in conversation, recall the route he walked every day, yet he would wander around the block every morning and find his way home without any hesitation. When researchers tested him with new information like asking him to locate a jar of nuts in his kitchen, he couldn't describe where it was or recall ever being asked the question before. Yet he would get up, walk directly to the shelf, retrieve the jar, and hand it over.
The body remembered what the mind had completely forgotten.
Precisely. The habit loop allowed him to execute complex sequences of actions, navigating his neighborhood, locating items, using the bathroom, without any conscious memory of the layout or the preceding decision. It proved that learning and making unconscious adaptive choices are entirely possible without remembering anything about the lesson or the choice itself.
So habits, as much as memory and reason, they root our entire behavior.
They absolutely do.
That is phenomenal, but it also raises a pretty big question. If habits are this powerful and disconnected from our frontal lobe, how is this mechanism being leveraged externally, by companies, for instance?
It's aggressively leveraged in the marketplace. I mean, consider fast food chains. They spend millions ensuring that the environment, the store architecture, the predictable colors, the employee scripts, is a consistent, powerful cue that triggers the purchasing routine. They eliminate all variability to ensure the loop fires predictably every single time.
And they engineer the reward to be hyper-immediate, tightening that loop to the point of compulsion.
Oh, absolutely. Take McDonald's fries, for instance. They're not merely salted potatoes. They are a triumph of food engineering.
They really are.
They are specifically formulated to begin disintegrating the moment they hit your tongue. This deliberate design choice ensures the hit of salt, grease, and fat, the reward, is delivered to the pleasure centers of the brain as fast as humanly possible, before the conscious mind can even fully register the chew. That neurological efficiency is entirely deliberate and designed to foster an automatic, repeating habit without any friction.
So we have the mechanism: cue, routine, reward. But if habits are fundamentally about efficient operation, why are destructive habits like smoking, overeating, or obsessive phone checking so incredibly difficult to break, even when we consciously know they are harmful? You mentioned a missing piece that provides the real stickiness.
The missing link is the driver, the true neurological engine of the habit loop: craving. The simple presence of CRR isn't enough for a habit to become long-term and automatic.
So what is craving, neurologically?
Craving is defined not as the consumption of the reward, but as the powerful, insistent sense of anticipation of that reward. It's the mechanism that causes the cue and the reward to become neurologically intertwined over time. It's the wanting, not the having.
And this anticipation is exactly what was mapped in the classic study involving Julio the macaque.
This was Wolfram Schultz's groundbreaking experiment back in the 1990s. Julio the macaque was positioned in a chair and taught a simple routine. When a specific shape appeared on a screen, that's the cue. He would pull a lever, the routine, and he would receive a squirt of his favorite drink, blackberry juice, the reward.
So what was the initial neurological pattern they observed when the habit was first being learned? What did his brain do?
Initially, Julio's brain activity, specifically the region associated with pleasure and happiness, would spike only upon receiving the juice. It was the "I got a reward" moment. Pure and simple.
Okay.
But as the habit strengthened and the task was repeated dozens and then hundreds of times, the neurological response shifted entirely. It was almost like a ghost moving through the circuit.
The anticipation became the reward itself.
Exactly. The pleasure spike moved dramatically forward in time. It started occurring the instant Julio saw the shape on the screen, before he even touched the lever or received any juice. This intense surge of expectation, this anticipation, is the definitive neurological signature of craving. Julio started expecting the reward the moment he saw the cue, and that expectation became the powerful driving force.
What's fascinating here is that this dopamine surge, this craving, isn't necessarily the pleasure of the reward itself, but it's the energy that motivates the routine.
That's the critical distinction. This craving is so powerful that it makes the monkeys ignore distractions and focus laser-like on executing the routine. In humans, this anticipation explains the compulsion.
Right.
We reach for a cigarette because we crave the nicotine rush before we even light up. We compulsively check a buzzing smartphone. We crave the momentary distraction, the social validation, or the temporary release from boredom, regardless of what the notification actually is. If that expectation isn't satisfied, the urge becomes physically uncomfortable until the routine is executed.
So if you are a marketer or someone trying to build a beneficial habit, the real trick is engineering that anticipation, that craving. This is beautifully demonstrated in the history of Pepsodent toothpaste, thanks to the legendary advertiser Claude Hopkins.
Hopkins was a true genius because he instinctively understood the CRR loop and the necessity of craving decades before scientists mapped the basal ganglia. He identified a universal cue, the natural film that forms on your teeth, and a clear reward, beautiful, bright teeth, and the status they imply. His advertising convinced millions that the ritual of brushing was the non-negotiable solution.
But the twist, which is the genius of the habit creation, is that the long-term success wasn't driven by clean teeth, which take time to notice. It was an immediate manufactured sensation.
That's absolutely key. Pepsodent contains specific ingredients like citric acid and mint oils that produced a slight, cool tingling sensation, a mild, temporary irritation in the mouth.
Right, that it's working feeling.
Exactly. People began to crave that slight tingle. They equated the sensory feedback with actual cleanliness. If they used a different product that didn't provide that instantaneous, almost chemical validation, their mouths didn't feel right, even if the cleaning power was equal. Hopkins wasn't selling clean teeth. He was selling a manufactured neurological sensation of validation, turning the tingle into the craving.
He made the absence of the sensation the new cue for dissatisfaction.
Precisely. And this craving became so powerful that it essentially created the mass market for toothpaste. When competing companies finally realized this, they weren't just imitating their product, they were scrambling to add similar tingling chemicals to their own pastes to create that crucial, irresistible neurological craving.
If that's creating a craving, let's look at a modern example of fixing a broken habit loop. Febreze. Their initial launch was a spectacular failure.
It failed disastrously because the habit loop was fundamentally flawed in their initial marketing. It was designed as an odorless product to eliminate bad smells. The problem was identifying a consistent, recognizable cue.
You can't see a smell.
Right, and the source famously details the Catwoman, whose house reeked, but she had become anosmic. She literally couldn't smell the odor anymore. So if the cue, the bad smell, is invisible or undetectable, the product is never used regularly. No cue, no habit.
So they pivoted. They stopped focusing on eliminating the negative cue and started focusing on creating a positive reward.
They observed consumers and realized that cleaning rituals often ended not with the elimination of the dirt, but with a moment of sensory validation and relaxation. A small moment of pride in a job well done.
The ah moment.
The ah moment. So they remarketed Febreze as a finishing touch at the absolute end of the cleaning routine, delivering a powerful, pleasant scent reward.
Which created a new craving.
Yes. The new loop was cue, finish mopping or dusting. Routine, spray Febreze. Reward, a pleasant scent, and sensory validation. The craving became the desire for that satisfying, fragrant sense of completion. This sensory validation was now a necessary piece of the routine. Sales soared to over $1 billion annually, all because they inserted their product into an existing habit structure and engineered a powerful, desirable craving.
That leads us directly into what happens when we want to change a destructive, deeply ingrained habit. If the old neurological paths, the old cues and cravings, never truly leave the basal ganglia, then they must be replaced, not eliminated. This is the cornerstone of the golden rule of habit change.
The golden rule is elegant, but difficult to execute. Keep the same cue, provide the same reward, but insert a new routine. We cannot simply excise the old habit. That path is always there, just waiting.
Waiting for a moment of weakness.
Exactly. If stress hits, or willpower fatigues, the brain defaults to the most efficient established path, which is usually the destructive habit. The only defense is to proactively provide a more efficient alternative routine that satisfies the underlying craving.
We see this methodology formalized in clinical practice, specifically habit reversal training. Take Mandy, the graduate student trying to stop biting her nails. This process starts with hypervigilant self-awareness.
First and foremost is awareness training. Mandy, like most people, bit her nails unconsciously. She was forced to identify the minute, subtle cues and the true cravings driving her behavior.
What was her cue?
Her cue wasn't boredom, as she thought. It was the specific minute tension or pain at the edge of the nail, or the moment she felt a ragged edge. And her craving wasn't necessarily the destruction of the nail, but the physical stimulation she got from biting and picking. Most people's habits have run on autopilot for so long, they don't even pay attention to the exact triggers anymore.
Once she knew the cue and the craving, she needed the new routine, the replacement.
That was the competing response. When she felt that specific tension in her fingertips, she was instructed to immediately perform a replacement behavior that provided similar physical stimulation but was benign.
Like what?
Putting her hands in her pockets, clenching her fists, gripping a pencil, or rapping her knuckles on the desk. The goal was to interrupt the destructive routine, satisfying the need for physical input with the new routine, thus building a new neural pathway atop the old one.
This structure sounds profoundly similar to the principles behind Alcoholics Anonymous, which is often described by researchers as a giant machine for changing habit loops.
That is precisely what AA is. Despite its organic development without traditional scientific input, AA doesn't directly attack the physical addiction itself, which often fades relatively quickly, leaving the powerful behavioral habit behind.
Right. It's the habit that lingers.
It intercepts the habit loop at the critical moments. The old cues, stress, social pressure, the craving for relief or escape are met with new, immediate routines, calling a sponsor, going to a meeting, engaging in the 12 steps.
And the reward.
The reward relief from emotional stress, communion, validation remains the same. AA provides an immediate, social, and reliable routine substitute that satisfies the fundamental human craving for relief, which is what the alcohol originally provided.
The sources cite incredibly compelling evidence reinforcing the need for replacement, even in some pretty extreme cases.
They do. Studies involving alcoholics who underwent brain surgeries specifically to interrupt the neurological reward pathway, literally disconnecting the reward, still found that the old cues and cravings were waiting. The moment they encountered a stressful trigger, the urge returned. They only achieved long-term sobriety once they learned and practiced new behavioral routines to deal with those triggers and provide a familiar form of relief. The brain needs a new script when the old cue fires.
But the golden rule, the substitution of the routine, often works until major stress hits. I mean, if everything is stable, the new routine holds. But tragedy, divorce, or financial ruin can send people immediately back to old habits, even if they were sober for years. What is the critical ingredient that keeps the new routine in place during those moments of extreme duress?
It is a deep, profound sense of belief that change is genuinely possible. Researchers found that when individuals were placed under high stress, those who stuck to their new routines were the ones who had cultivated this belief. It wasn't necessarily a strictly religious belief, but a belief in one's own agency and the possibility of transformation.
And that belief, they discovered, is often a communal phenomenon. It doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Absolutely. This belief rarely emerges in isolation. It thrives within a supportive community AA, a recovery group, or therapy. The act of sitting in a room and hearing the success stories of others who look like you and share similar struggles is an incredibly powerful mechanism.
Because you see it's possible.
It allows people to look around and think, if it worked for that guy who seems just as broken as me, then perhaps I can suspend my disbelief and try this. The group convinces individuals that the change is feasible, thereby giving them the mental fortitude to choose the new routine when the old, efficient path beckons during a crisis.
We see this community-based fortitude outside of recovery, too. Look at Tony Dungy and his Indianapolis Colts. Dungy used the golden rule extensively to train his players to react automatically to on-field cues, removing the need for slow decision-making in the heat of the game. Yet for years, the team struggled under pressure. They choked in the playoffs.
Dungy knew the mechanics of habit, but he was missing the belief. He consistently told players that belief was the biggest part of success. For his cults, the necessary communal belief that they could win only solidified after a personal tragedy involving his son's passing.
Wow.
The shared experience of watching their coach navigate profound adversity and the communal bond that forged made the behavioral habits he had drilled into them finally stick under the ultimate pressure of high-stakes football. The shared belief created the psychological resilience necessary to override the old destructive routines when they were most aggressively triggered by fear and stress.
Shifting from individual lives to organizations, we see that some habits matter far more than others because they trigger widespread systemic change that permeates the entire culture. These are the keystone habits.
Keystone habits are the small wins. They're the habits that matter most because they initiate widespread change, creating structures and cultures where other positive habits can flourish. Success, whether it's individual or organizational, is not about fixing 100 problems simultaneously.
Right, that's impossible.
It's about identifying a few key priorities and fashioning them into powerful levers that initiate a ripple effect.
And the sources provide some excellent examples of these subtle ripple effects in daily life. It's fascinating.
Exercise is the classic individual keystone habit. People who habitually exercise, even if they start infrequently, often begin making better food choices, becoming more productive at work, smoking less, showing more patience with their families,
Even managing their finances better.
and even managing their credit cards and personal budgets more responsibly. The initial habit of physical discipline just spills over into completely unrelated areas because it instills a fundamental sense of self-control and mastery.
And the same applies at the domestic level.
Absolutely. Families who habitually eat dinner together raise children who consistently demonstrate better grades and greater emotional control. The routine of gathering at a set time provides a small, structured moment of predictable communication.
And even simpler than that.
Even the simple routine of making your bed every morning is correlated with better productivity, a greater sense of well-being, and stronger budgeting skills. The small, successful routine anchors the entire day.
The ultimate organizational example of a keystone habit in action is Paul O'Neill at Alcoa, the aluminum company of America, back in 1987. When he took over as CEO, investors expected him to talk about profit forecasts, cost-cutting, market share,
The usual stuff.
the usual stuff. Instead, he shocked Wall Street by announcing he would focus solely on one single goal: achieving 0 worker injuries.
It was an infamous moment because, to the analysts, focusing on worker safety seemed completely irrelevant to the bottom line. I mean, Alcoa worked with molten metal, massive machinery, toxic chemicals. Accidents were a painful but accepted part of the business.
But O'Neill understood that safety was a powerful keystone habit that could force the entire organization to change its underlying routines.
Yes.
So how did he engineer that routine using the CRR structure organizationally?
O'Neill mandated an entirely new habit loop across the global organization. The cue was any worker injury, a massive problem that was impossible to ignore. The routine was mandatory and time-sensitive. The unit president anywhere in the world had to report to O'Neill directly within 24 hours with a comprehensive plan to prevent recurrence.
And the reward.
The reward was implicitly tied to the organizational structure, promotion, recognition, and job security, depended entirely on adherence to these immediate safety routines.
And the 24-hour deadline was the brilliant part of the compulsion. It forced the silos to break down.
It did. In order to get the report written, analyzed, and delivered to O'Neill in Pittsburgh in 24 hours, unit presidents couldn't rely on the old, slow, bureaucratic routines. They had to mandate immediate, constant, effective communication with floor managers. The floor managers, in turn, had to rely on the lowest-level workers to raise warnings the instant they saw a risk.
So it flattened the whole hierarchy.
The single safety mandate forced the creation of new communication and information systems, effectively breaking down decades of rigid organizational hierarchy.
And the ripple effect was staggering.
The safety focus unexpectedly led to massive quality improvements and cost reductions. For instance, to stop a machine from producing a faulty part that could cause an injury, they had to measure efficiency, temperature, maintenance schedules more carefully. This inadvertently led to better quality aluminum. It even overcame union resistance against measuring productivity, because measuring output now served the explicit shared goal of reducing safety risks. Over O'Neill's tenure, Alcoa's stock value increased 5-fold. The seemingly tangential focus on safety changed everything because it institutionalized a new set of organizational habits.
Another powerful keystone habit for individuals is willpower, which studies indicate is the single most important predictor of success. But as we discussed earlier, willpower fatigues, it runs out.
It acts exactly like a muscle that tires if it's overworked. The classic evidence comes from the famous radish cookie experiment. Researchers set up a room with warm, fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies, the irresistible temptation, and bitter radishes.
A tough choice.
Half the students were told to eat cookies freely. The other half were forced to use their willpower to ignore the cookies and eat only the radishes.
They intentionally depleted one group's willpower reserve.
Exactly. Then, both groups were given an impossible puzzle to solve. The students who had exerted their willpower by eating the bitter radish and ignoring the delicious cookies quit the impossible puzzle 60% faster than those who had eaten the cookies freely. They had depleted their finite willpower reserve and had nothing left for the subsequent mental task.
So how does an organization like Starbucks, which relies on consistent employee self-discipline and emotional control during high-stress interactions, think of the morning rush, build this muscle without exhausting it?
Starbucks invested millions in creating habits to strengthen self-discipline, especially crucial for employees like Travis Leach, who started as a struggling high school dropout. Their solution was rigorous training centered on anticipating moments of stress, which they called inflection points.
Inflection points.
And they used a technique called implementation intentions.
Implementation intentions. That sounds clinical, but what does it mean practically?
It is essentially creating a detailed, pre-planned if-then routine for every likely stressor. Instead of waiting for the moment of stress, like an angry customer, and relying on exhausted willpower to react correctly, they instilled an automatic habit.
So what was the habit?
For an angry customer, Starbucks trained their baristas using the specific LADI method. Listen, acknowledge, take action, thank, and explain.
So when the inflection point arrived, they didn't have to pause and think. They automatically defaulted to the train routine, no decision required.
Which saves the willpower from being exhausted by an emotional reaction. If they get angry, they don't lose control, they automatically go to step one. Listen. This technique externalized the necessary self-discipline by converting decision-making under stress into a simple, efficient habit chunk executed by the basal ganglia.
This precise mechanism was also used for physical recovery, which can be immensely painful and willpower draining.
The Scottish Hospital study of patients recovering from joint replacement surgery, a procedure so painful the temptation to quit physical therapy is strongest, is extremely powerful. Patients who were simply told to exercise recovered slower than those who wrote out specific plans anticipating obstacles and pain points.
They wrote it down.
They detailed things like, if the pain becomes too much when I walk to the bus stop tomorrow, then I will take these specific pills and only walk half the distance. They preloaded the willpower needed for those inevitable inflection points by creating an automatic routine.
We've seen how intentional leaders and individuals create beneficial habits. But what happens when habits are allowed to solidify without thoughtful guidance? Or when the routines meant to foster cooperation become toxic?
This is where we see organizational inertia become deadly. Complex organizations inherently rely on routines as necessary truces to manage internal rivalries, competing department priorities, and complexity.
They have to.
They have to. If they had to consciously debate every procedure every day, they would cease to function. However, if these routines are not carefully monitored, or if the underlying culture is toxic, they become deeply destructive, calcified habits.
Rhode Island Hospital serves as a frightening, tragic example of this, specifically the deep-seated tension between physician authority and nurse autonomy.
The culture was corrosively hierarchical. Nurses described feeling worthless and disposable due to physician arrogance and the unwritten rule that doctors were never to be questioned.
That's a dangerous environment.
It is. And because nurses couldn't confront doctors directly, they developed elaborate, informal routines, defensive habits, to manage risk and conflict. This included using colored markers on the surgical whiteboards to signal which surgeons were safe and which were dangerous. Red meant jerk, and black meant, ominously, do not contradict this one. These were defensive habits, not safety protocols.
And these unspoken dysfunctional habits led directly to a tragedy in 1987 that cost a man his life.
A surgeon, rushing through a spinal procedure, was called to operate on an 86-year-old man with a subdural hematoma. When the OR nurse noted that the consent form failed to indicate which side of the head the hematoma was on, the surgeon snapped. He dismissed her query, scribbled right on the form, and proceeded with the surgery.
He was following the unwritten rule.
He was adhering to the toxic, unwritten routine that the surgeon always wins and the nurse is subordinate.
The hematoma, tragically, was on the left side.
That's right. They cut open the wrong side of the elderly man's head. The patient died 2 weeks later. And this wasn't an isolated incident either. Subsequent investigations revealed similar repeated errors that resulted in massive fines. The dysfunctional organizational habits, the rigid routines that protected the surgeon's ego and authority over patient safety, had become destructive.
And this brings us back to a recurring theme: crisis as an opportunity for transformation.
The disaster and the subsequent repeated errors, leading to enormous fines, created the necessary organizational jolt. Leaders were finally able to capitalize on the turmoil to overhaul the entire system. They mandated things like mandatory checklists, timeouts before surgery where nurses were required to speak up.
Things that should have been there all along.
Things that should have been there all along, and even the installation of video cameras, all measures that had been proposed and rejected when the culture was comfortable and resistant to change. Crisis makes deeply ingrained, calcified organizational habits malleable.
We see a similar devastating failure of routine at the 1987 King's Cross London subway fire, which killed 31 people. This wasn't malice, it was bureaucratic habit.
The investigation showed that the failures were the result of deeply entrenched, rational, but siloed organizational routines. The fire started small in a burning wad of tissue beneath an escalator. A staff member, Philip Brickell, saw it, instinctively beat it out with a magazine, and then returned to his post.
But he didn't report it.
Critically, he did not report it to the fire brigade.
Why not? I mean, if the tissue was visibly burning, why did he not escalate the situation immediately?
Because the organizational truce stipulated that looking for fires wasn't his job. He was operational staff. Fire routines were outdated, and different departments managed different things, operational staff versus engineering. There were organizational silos habits of not trespassing on other departments' territory that simply dictated that he return to his own routine, even when public safety was clearly at risk.
So his routine became the priority over the common sense action.
It did. And the escalation of the fire itself was fueled by another unexamined routine, this one concerning maintenance.
What was that?
The fire rapidly engulfed the escalator shaft, which acted like a chimney. The investigation discovered the shaft was covered by 20 layers of old paint. This was another unexamined organizational routine, the practice of simply painting over old layers without removing them, that continued for decades. That paint trapped superheated gas, causing a catastrophic trench effect explosion that killed dozens of commuters instantly. Every single failure in that tragedy was ultimately traced back to the automatic, often unwritten habits the organization used as truces to get through the day, rather than deliberate, thoughtful action guided by safety.
It's clear that habits dictate our personal success and the functionality of our organizations. But when we zoom out, we find they also dictate society, and they can be predicted and manipulated, sometimes with astonishing accuracy. Let's talk about Target's ability to essentially predict when a customer is pregnant before she even tells her family.
This is the extraordinary work of the statistician Andrew Pohl. Target's goal was simple: identify pregnant customers before they officially register their pregnancy.
Why was that so important?
The economics of this are crucial. New parents are at a moment of profound habitual vulnerability. Their previous established shopping routines, where they buy diapers, formula, clothing, are shattered, making them incredibly open to establishing new loyalties. It's a key moment for a retailer.
This is a classic example of identifying a moment of habitual malleability. So how do you track that without asking a direct question?
Pohl identified a cluster of about 25 products that, when purchased together, indicated a high likelihood of pregnancy, especially in the second trimester. And these weren't obvious items like maternity clothes.
What were they?
Things like unscented soaps, high magnesium supplements, cocoa butter lotion, and certain vitamins. Target's algorithm could process a woman's purchasing data, assign a pregnancy prediction score, estimate the due date, and then target coupons when the mother was on the brink of new, major purchasing habit.
But they ran into the issue we discussed earlier. The customers felt unsettled, like they were being watched. The data was too accurate, too invasive.
They did. Target learned that sending a woman a coupon specifically for diapers before she told anyone she was pregnant was unsettling and often resulted in complaints. The brilliance of the solution was the manipulation through camouflage.
How did they hide it?
They started mixing in coupons for completely unrelated items like lawnmowers, office supplies, or wine glasses alongside the maternity coupons. The customer would use the coupons, unaware that the data mining had accurately predicted her life changes before she did, thus allowing the habitual shift to take place without the consumer feeling surveilled.
This manipulation of social habits also extends into culture, particularly music and the creation of a hit song. Look at Outkast's Hey Ya.
Hey Ya is a fascinating case. Hit Song Science, a computer program, predicted it would be a massive hit based on its rhythm and tempo. Yet early radio data showed listeners hated it and tuned out rapidly, usually within 30 seconds,
Why?
because the song was profoundly unfamiliar in its structure.
And why does unfamiliarity cause rejection?
Our brains crave familiarity in music because the regions involved in processing sound are designed to seek out patterns and predict what comes next. If a song sounds too unfamiliar or dissonant, the brain essentially files it away or ignores it to conserve energy.
So how did the radio industry turn listener rejection into a craving?
They used a deliberate sandwiching technique. They played Hey Ya repeatedly, sometimes 3 times an hour, always positioned immediately alongside established, familiar, sticky hits that the audience already loved. This forced exposure allowed the unfamiliar elements of Hey Ya to quickly become familiar patterns.
So they made it familiar by force.
Exactly. Once the song was established as familiar, once the craving for predictability was satisfied, the tune-out rate dropped dramatically, turning it into the massive hit that listeners soon started to crave. The new habit liking the song was grafted onto old, familiar listening habits.
Finally, we see the power of habit at the societal level in massive social and political movements such as the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks wasn't the first person arrested for violating segregation laws, yet her arrest catalyzed a movement.
Movements happen when pre-existing social habits are activated and leveraged. Rosa Parks' arrest became the catalyst because of her unique set of social habits and network connections that activated 2 critical levels of social ties.
Tell us about those 2 ties and their necessity.
First, the strong ties. These are your close friends, family, and colleagues. Parks was deeply respected by ministers and community leaders, people like E.D. Nixon and Martin Luther King Jr., which ensured immediate commitment and the rapid organized spread of the protest.
And the second?
Second, the weak ties. These are casual acquaintances, neighbors, and peer networks. The perceived consensus, driven by widely distributed flyers and newspaper reports that claimed everyone is participating, created massive social peer pressure. People who didn't know Parks personally joined because they feared social disapproval or exclusion from their weak-tie acquaintances. This gave the boycott the critical, widespread momentum needed for success.
And this focus on institutionalizing identity through group habits was formalized by Pastor Rick Warren at Saddleback Church.
Warren built a megachurch by realizing that trying to convert individuals one by one was too exhausting and too reliant on individual willpower. He focused on converting groups and institutionalizing faith through daily habits. He designed curriculums to teach parishioners specific, repeatable habits of faith, small group discussions, structured Bible study, scheduled service, that would eventually create a new, collective, self-propelling self-identity. This shift took the entire burden for spiritual growth off the pastor and delegated it to the congregation's self-sustaining routines.
As we conclude this deep dive into the hidden science of habit, we have to confront the biggest philosophical questions surrounding this topic. If nearly half of our lives are automatic, where does that leave free will? The law has been forced to grapple with this very contradiction, providing 2 dramatic and contrasting examples.
The cases are Brian Thomas and Angie Bachman. Brian Thomas killed his wife during a sleep terror episode. He was dreaming he was fighting an intruder, and he physically acted out that primal defensive habit, the fight instinct, while unconscious. His lawyer argued that he lacked any conscious choice in the matter.
And the outcome was clear-cut.
Thomas was found not guilty of murder. The court accepted that his actions were involuntary, dictated by the most primitive, automatic habits in his brain's central pattern generators. During a sleep terror, without his higher cognition interceding, he literally had no ability to choose otherwise.
Contrast that with Angie Bachman, the pathological gambler who lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, describing a powerful, irresistible craving that drove her to the casino daily, especially when stress hit.
Bachman's lawyer used a similar defense. She was driven by uncontrollable habit and compulsion, yet she was held responsible for her debts.
Why the different outcome?
Well, neurological research clearly showed that pathological gamblers' brains react to near misses almost exactly like a win-a-powerful habit loop that keeps them betting, regardless of the financial cost. But the crucial distinction the court made was this. Bachman, unlike Thomas, was aware of her addiction and at some point had possessed the conscious capacity to intervene in the habit loop. She knew the consequences, and she chose not to insert a new routine.
So what does this tell us about the relationship between habit and destiny, and where responsibility lies?
The core lesson, synthesized by the research, is that habits are not destiny. They're powerful, they are automatic, but they are malleable. We are responsible for our habits because we possess the capacity for conscious intervention. Even when a habit is deeply rooted, the first step to change is the conscious, difficult decision to identify the cue and reward driving it, and then implement the golden rule by inserting a new routine.
So the difference between those who change and those who don't is that initial conscious decision to interrupt the autopilot.
That's it. This reminds me of the foundational idea that the great American psychologist William James explored in his own life.
Right.
James was depressed and struggling at age 28. He decided to conduct an experiment on himself, which he documented meticulously. He wrote in his diary, "My first act of free will shall be to believe in free will." He acknowledged there was no empirical proof that free will was truly real, but he decided to free himself to believe that change was possible through conscious effort. He practiced this belief every day, creating new habits of thought and action. Understanding the mechanics of habit gives us the intellectual roadmap to act on that belief, echoing the idea that the way we habitually think of ourselves creates the worlds we inhabit.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now as you swim in the unexamined water of your daily life? We've covered the three-step loop, the power of craving as the engine, the golden rule of replacement, and the cascading effects of keystone habits.
Let me leave you with the water analogy, adapted from the late writer David Foster Wallace.
Mm.
Two young fish encounter an older fish who asks, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" The young fish swim on, and one eventually turns to the other and asks, "What the hell is water?"
Right.
The routines and habits that govern our daily lives are exactly that, the water we swim in. They are so pervasive, so automatic, and so vital that we rarely notice them. The challenge, the first step toward genuine, lasting change, is to stop taking the water of your daily routine for granted and start examining it.
That is a powerful and practical challenge. So if you want to start this process of conscious intervention, isolate a simple recurring routine, maybe that mid-afternoon cookie break or scrolling Instagram the second you get home. Instead of just trying to quit, use the scientific method you learned today.
Test hypotheses for the reward. If you reach for that cookie, is it the sugar you crave? Is it a psychological break from work? Is it the quick socialization with a colleague? Try replacing the cookie with 3 different routines over 3 days. An apple, quick walk around the building, or a 5-minute gossip session with that colleague.
And then check in with yourself 15 minutes later. Did the urge for the cookie go away? By experimenting with the routine, you pinpoint the true underlying craving, which is often emotional or social, not physical. And once you identify that craving, you can consciously insert the new, healthier routine that satisfies it. That is your first act of free will against the autopilot.